Welcome to Rural Assembly Everywhere. I'm Tatum Fotheringill, Director of Programming and Partnerships at Rural Assembly. Welcome to those of you who are joining us for the first time, and welcome back to the folks who have joined us year after year. The Rural Assembly has been hosting gatherings since 2007 in person, and we've been hosting Rural Assembly Everywhere online since 2020. We've remained online because, as you can see from the chat, this is a great opportunity to throw the doors wide open and have a chance to gather, regardless of finding just one place in the country where we can all converge. Some of you may be joining from your desks at work, from the couch, or from the front porch. I hope that some of you are watching with your friends or colleagues and talking in real time about what you'll see here today. Everywhere is a virtual festival designed to celebrate rural experiences and engage diverse rural voices. A couple of months ago, we put out a call to help answer the question, how can we nurture thriving communities? Today will include a compilation of responses sent in by you, curated conversations that speak to our theme, and music and poetry to help us steep ourselves in these ideas. In fact, we had so much great content that we are going to go over time today, but we wanted to share it all with you. So if you have to leave early at any point, the replay will be available here in Crowdcast or later on YouTube. And for those of you who are with us until the end today, we are going to be raffling off some Rural Assembly shirts and stickers at the end, so stick around. Please participate in the chat throughout. Everywhere is what it is because of you. Meet each other, get connected, and we hope you'll build on those connections in the sessions we're offering next week. I'm eager to get started, and I hope you are too. So let's now turn to a conversation with Benya Kraus and Autumn Cavender, welcoming us into the idea of nurturing thriving communities.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to what is the first session of the Rural Assembly Everywhere gathering. Even though it is virtual, I hope this session is a reminder that we are leaning in close and are in community with one another. And I'm so grateful to have the opportunity to open up what is one of my favorite gatherings. One of the few virtual gatherings that really do make you feel like you are close and connected and as close as an in-person connection can be. So thanks to the organizers for putting this on and for the chance for us to gather together and have this conversation tonight. I'll start maybe first just with my introduction, and then I want to offer it over to my newly met friend, Autumn, to kind of share a little bit about how you come into this nurturing, thriving communities conversation. But for those tuning in, hello, my name is Benya Kraus. I call home a mix of Wasika, Minnesota and Bangkok, Thailand, currently calling in from South Central Minnesota. My family has farmed here for the past 6 generations. And a little interesting fact about southern Minnesota and where we farm actually around the same time that they arrived was also the biggest mass execution of the Dakota people biggest mass execution in our nation's history. So I also am joining on Dakota land of the Wakapute people, and I share that as a part of my introduction, and also where I hope our conversation can go too, of how we define community and belonging to place, and how do we share places together, and all the sweet, beautiful, kind of messy histories that we carry with us and into present and future too. So, with that, I'll pass it over to you, Autumn, to share us a little bit about where you are calling in from, where you call home, on kind of a little bit of the other side of Minnesota, and if you can take us there and brought you to your community.
Absolutely. So in English, my name is Autumn Cavender. I am Mwakpetu and Dakota, actually, from the Upper Sioux Reservation in southwestern Minnesota, or we call it Pejuta Zizik Api Mokoche, or the land where they dig for the yellow medicine. It's kind of interesting that you bring that up. I had relatives who fought in the War of 1862 that ended up with the mass execution of the 38 condemned men in Mankato. And yeah, I live out here near my home community with my partner, my two beautiful baby boys, my crazy German Shepherd dog who thinks that she should like be able to like live on the couch and in my lap all of the time, which, you know, all 70 pounds of her. I'm an artist. I'm a writer, I'm a longtime community activist, decolonization activist, language revitalization, cultural revitalization specialist. But kind of like my main gig, what I'm mostly known for, is as a home birth midwife and as somebody who works and specializes in the revitalization of Indigenous birth practices. And so that's that's kind of a little bit about me and about my home and where I come from. You know, thank you all so much for having me and giving me a space and a chance to talk to y'all. I appreciate it.
As you were introducing yourself, there's like a piece of like, I was like, wow. And how is it that, you know, 6 generations later, like we come to be where, you know, we are now like in conversation together, still on, you know, the similar lands, right? But now with like so much different other context, like how are we brought together? And so, yeah, just noting first, just like what a gift. So one of the things I really wanted to talk to you about is you know, you mentioned you're an expert in learner in Indigenous birthing practice, and you know, as we kick off this theme of nurturing thriving communities, I look to often that the very first nurturer of all of our lives are, you know, the wombs that we came out of, belong to. So I'm curious, you know, what have you seen as someone who is so close to the birthing process, of that has surprised you, helped you kind of think of your own life, maybe in different ways? Loaded question.
Very loaded question. Holy cow. Let's get right off the bat here. Well, one of the things that I think everyone needs to understand about midwives, about birth workers in general, but midwives in particular, is that we are nerds, like complete, utter nerds about birth and about the entire perinatal period. And we can talk about this one topic ad nauseum. Every single other presentation that we give, even if it's about a completely different topic, it's somehow going to involve and reincorporate a ton of metaphors around birth. And I think because it's one of the things that, you know, particularly from an Indigenous and a Dakota perspective, birth is one of the few original ceremonies. Right? It's something that is holy regardless of whether or not there's somebody there making it holy, right? You know, it doesn't need a spiritual leader or a priest or, you know, anything else around it to make it sacred. It doesn't matter where it occurs. It doesn't matter the circumstances under which it occurs. It doesn't matter if it's a wanted pregnancy or not. It doesn't matter all of these other things. The act of creation, carrying, and birthing is a cosmic act. It's a cosmic reflection of our place in the universe, and it's this continually creative process. And one of the, like, I've learned so much. I think most of the lessons that I carry with me in my day-to-day life and in my day-to-day practice have come as a result of my experience with birth. So it's really hard to pick out any one thing. I think one of the biggest things that I try to instill in my clients and in the birthing families that I work with is this idea that the only way out really is through. We don't actually get to the other side. We don't get to be somewhere else without the journey of traveling there. Right? Without that process. And that idea that the only way out of any of these situations that we find ourselves in, our socio-political situation, our economic situations, like the real wrestling with social justice issues, no matter where we are, no matter where we call home, really there's no easy way, there's no shortcut. The only way out is through.
There's no way out but through.
Yep.
Because I think often we think of birth as like as an event, right? And then you're done.
Cute.
So can you talk a little bit about, you know, what is the continuity of creation? Like, what does it mean to keep on having to is it rebirthing in some way?
Reborning, re-being, relearning how to be. So I think, you know, you're absolutely right. I mean, anytime I'm working with a family in any capacity, either as a child birth educator or as a doula or as a midwife or just somebody being in community, there's this idea that like labor and birth is the event, and that's the thing that we're going to prep for, right? And it's then all of the things, you know, we're planning for this one event, and then what? There's a midwife who practices in Bali. Her name is Robin Lim, and she's written one of the very few books there exists about like the postpartum. But she makes this really compelling point that I love and I love to talk about, which is this idea of like, you are only pregnant for 9 months. You are postpartum for the rest of your life. I had the opportunity to be in Maori territory in New Zealand, and I was at a conference. A really amazing conference called the Indigenous Methodologies Conference, and somebody was talking about tattooing, or how they say in their language, moko, and that moko are like the carrying of your experience. And, you know, tattooing has a very prominent history in many cultures around the world, but it's this idea of carrying your experiences with you. And the point the presenter was making was that every scar is also moko, right? Stretch marks for women are moko, right? Because these are the marks of where we carried our babies in our belly. And when we kind of expand that back, there gets to be some truly heartbreaking consequences of that. Particularly in like talking about in rural spaces or places that have experienced a lot of environmental degradation or a lot of environmental contamination, there's a lot of like heavy metal toxicity that really that lives in your body permanently after you've been exposed, right? It's hard to purge your body of it. It lives in you for the rest of your life. But that's not entirely true. The only way to actually purge some of these like heavy metal toxicities, heavy chemical toxicities, is actually by being pregnant. It's actually by nursing, because now that baby is pulling off the toxicity from me so that they can grow it within their own bodies now. Right. And so when we talk about the intergenerational consequences of particular actions, the intergenerational consequences of environmental contamination, like we're not just talking about handing it down to our children in like a broader global physical sense, right, of like inheriting the world. We're talking about passing it on through our very bodies. And so when we talk about like the drive, right, like what wakes us up in the morning and like gets us back on that horse to do hard work, like that's a big one for me. Is like, what exactly are we choosing to pass on? Because everything that we don't deal with now gets moved to the next generation to deal with.
Wow. Yeah.
Sorry, it's heavy.
I mean, I'm thankful for you bringing in this concept, this like language of moko, because I think it, and just this thinking of ourselves as like, what are the things that we carry with us, and one of the things you were saying of like, how do we live our lives while we carry both contaminants that maybe we are unaware of? What's our responsibility of as the one, you know, who received it, maybe didn't create it, but now carry it? What do we do with that?
I was actually thinking about rivers a lot. And this idea, you know, so the Minnesota River cuts right through where I live. It's a really powerful body of water. You know, when it was behind a glacier, it actually cut this entire river valley in like a single magical moment and just ripped everything to shreds. It was, you know, I would have loved to have been there to see it. It would have been incredible. But is that river the same river that flowed then, 10,000 years ago? I mean, it's cutting through the same space, right? The water that flows out of Big Stone Lake, a coal-fired power plant, sits on the headwaters of the Minnesota River. And like, is that water the same water that was there in 1862 that like bathed the wounds of those who suffered in the Battle of Wood Lake or at the Battle of Birch Coulee? I don't know. It's still, though, a body of water that carries that intergenerational legacy, that story. right? The water itself on a molecular level may be very different. It may not be the same, right? It eventually joins with the Mississippi and flows down to the Gulf of Mexico and is returned to us, you know, from the one world ocean, mostly through storms coming up on the Pacific, right? So I don't even know if any of the water molecules are the same that were there then or that will continue to be there now. But I think it's this idea of constancy, that the identity is still the same, at least from a human perspective, even if on a very base level it has fundamentally changed.
I mean, it feels like we're like the community change work is hard. And even in this conversation, I'm so attentive to like the paradoxes that I feel like I'm speaking to, of like, both we need to name that the river has harmed
Yep.
and the river is not the same. And also it's not the same because there are new molecules in it, and there are new, you know, relationships to foster even on top of legacies of harm. And so what does it take to still keep loving in the midst of that?
I don't know. I feel like anybody working for community building, particularly in rural spaces, this is a thing that we have to like really actively hold and be in conversation with. Like there's people with whom I do not see eye to eye about anything on, you know, when it comes to the socio-political situation in this country, around the world, spiritually, philosophically, really anything, right? But we both have in our minds what it means to be a good neighbor. And we can build a foundation from that. We can move forward from that. You know, there's an organization that functions out here called Land Stewardship Project. And one of the things that I really appreciate about them is, you know, doing a lot of farm organizing and social justice farm organizing in rural spaces is really on this basis of you need to find the common ground, right? You know, find the common ground with people. Because like the fact that I don't agree with you on anything and the fact that you're a good neighbor are not exclusive truths. There's the same thing. And I have to be comfortable enough in that space to be able to hold those contradictions, right? Those paradoxes, even if they're not really, but they feel contradictory to me. I have to be the one to like have the emotional maturity to hold that.
Beautifully said and beautifully wrapped up. So thank you for joining me in this conversation. I feel like we only just scratched the surface, but and thanks for everyone tuning in too. So many nuggets of wisdom. I'll just quote a few that I wrote down that I am going to be thinking about. How do we focus on the glory of the small thing? Life does not stop by our actions. Life keeps going. It's more powerful than that, because ultimately life lusts after itself. So thank you, Adam, for pointing us towards the direction of new life, new birth, and how we can keep rebirthing and rebirthing our communities, and by doing that also needing to rebirth ourselves. So thank you, Adam.
And thank you so much for being willing to spend the time with me. I really appreciate it. And it's lovely to meet you, Benya.
I'm Sally Bice from the Montvales. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our song Lou. I wrote it a couple years ago after taking my niece to the ocean for the first time when she was a toddler, and also after reading some articles about protections being stripped from public lands. And both of those things got me thinking on how important wild places have been to me in my life, and just the importance of protecting those places for the next generation. So this song is a meditation on that. Thanks for listening.
Cool. Okay.
Hey there, Lou. When I look across the desert, all I see is you. You go on forever, so I guess that's why it's gotta turn out alright. And in this mountain range, you'll come here when you're older, and I hope it's the same. And it'll be your turn to get washed in the rain. When you wake up, you ask, where have I gone? And though the time goes fast, I know it's gonna be too long. So in the countryside, maybe you'll come back when you can taste the wine. Everything that's worth it, well, it takes some time. By the ocean wide, can you keep on wading through the rising tide? In this world that we've been burning, can you make it right? When you wake up, you ask, where have I gone? And though the time goes fast, I know it's gonna be too long. Hey there, Lou. When I look across the desert, all I see is you. And in my eyes, you go on forever, so I guess that's why it's gotta turn out alright.
Hello, this is Mark Bodine from Livingston, Montana, visiting here in Bison, South Dakota. Over in Livingston, I write poetry and run Elk River Books, so come visit next time you're out that way. I thought I'd read a poem from my new book, These Creatures of a Day, called Quick Question. Since every glass of water you drink has filtered through countless dinosaurs, has touched the rocks of every river, has washed the bodies of whales and the ancestors of that trout you had for dinner with lemon butter and a sprig of rosemary. Since every breath you breathe contains the fire of long dead stars, molecules of moonlight, and particles once belonging to Buddha and Basho, Cleopatra and Copernicus, Joan of Arc and Eva Braun. Since every song you've heard is composed of those same notes sung by Homer, played by Django Reinhardt, hummed by children skipping rope in Ghana, and cradled by seashells strewn across unnumbered beaches. Since the snowflakes melting on your tongue hold smoke from Roman campfires, dust from the farms of Okies, the ashes of children of Hiroshima and Dachau, Dresden and Palestine. Since every echo you hear is an echo of an echo, which is the echo of another. Every heartbeat is a chorus, and every sunrise you watch is someone else's sunset. Considering all of this, how can you possibly tell me that there exists anywhere in this burning world of blood and marigolds some rough beast accurately called an individual? Thank you.
Hi, my name is John Taylor, and I live in Cambridge, Illinois, a rural village in west central Illinois, population of about 2,000 people. And 10 years ago, I started hosting concerts here at our home. I thought I'd tell you a little bit about some of the neat things that I've seen that have happened as a result of that. So since then, I've gone on to host nearly 700 concerts. About a quarter of those have been international artists, and I try to focus on those international artists because, especially being in a rural area, it's rare to be able to have experiences with people from other cultures, to meet those people, to learn about their cultures, their traditions, and those sorts of things. All of the concerts that I've done have been open to everyone, open to all ages, family friendly, and they've either been free or by donation, and 100% of all of the donations go to the performers. This is just a passion project for me, but the things that I've received from this are worth more than any amount of money. So I feel very passionate about doing this. So the first 4 or 5 years that I was doing this, I specifically was hosting concerts exclusively here at our home. But because I was seeing so many amazing things happen, I decided that I needed to reach more people and I wanted to have a greater impact. And so in 2018, I started what's now known as the Levitamp Galva Music Series. It's a 10-week free, family-friendly concert series that happens at Wiley Park in Galva, Illinois, another small town that's nearby. After the first couple of years of doing that series, we were able to get a permanent stage built in Wiley Park. We ended up also building a permanent stage here at College Square Park in Cambridge. I opened in 2019 the Bishopville Creative Commons and Art Cooperative, which is my indoor venue as well. I kind of outgrew the indoor space here at our home. And just in general, the things that I've seen as a result of all of this is the community has just become more engaged. Just in general, I see more people going out and volunteering, getting involved in the community, people going out and starting businesses, people going out and just attending and supporting community events and causes. And it's an amazing thing. I think that these concerts have definitely elevated this area socially, culturally, and economically, and we're just getting started. Here in the last couple of years, I also started a nonprofit, Crossroads Cultural Connections, in order to do more of this work and to get some more people involved as well. Our main focus, beyond the concerts, we also do concerts, but beyond the concerts, we're bringing artists into the schools to allow young people to have these experiences that may otherwise not be able to. And so that's been an extremely rewarding thing, all of this has. So anyway, I appreciate your time, and thank you.
Hey, Rural Assembly, Tiffany Gladney here, NC Child's Senior Director of Policy and Government Relations. NC Child is so proud to have played a part in the efforts to expand Medicaid here in North Carolina. And guess what? We got it done. But now we're working on making sure that early childhood education is not only affordable, but accessible for working families. We're also looking at what resources and tools can we add to the toolbox for adults who support children as it relates to the mental health crisis.
Hey everyone, Michael Cooper, Senior Director of Advocacy for NC Child. So you might not think it, but North Carolina has the second largest population of rural people in the United States. We're a rural state. We're a state built on small towns and family farms and small businesses. So part of our mission is to get out there and to be in community, to show up and to listen to the voices of lived experience. And we're trying to do that in our work.
Hey y'all, my name is Erica Palmer-Smith and I have the honor of serving as Executive Director. At NC Child, we want every child to have the opportunity to thrive, regardless of where they live. This year, we're showing up in all 100 counties through our mental health mapping, our focus groups, our data presentations, our listening tour, and through the work of our Parent Advisory Council and our Youth Advocacy Council.
Whether it's Goldsboro, Rockingham, North Wilkesboro, my hometown, or Taylorsville, we're a staff, we're a team that comes from small towns, that comes from rural North Carolina. We care about those communities, and we want for them to have a seat at the table in this work.
Like so many on our staff, I grew up in a small rural county, and that's where my nieces and nephews are growing up now. So many of us saw firsthand what it's like to experience the unique challenges of growing up in a rural community. And we want to make sure that the children who are so important to us are able to experience every opportunity to achieve their full potential.
Don't forget, join the movement and come see us sometime.
Next Thursday, August 8th, from 2 to 4 p.m., we're going to be doing a story circle with some people that participated today in the Rural Assembly. A story circle is a technique coming out of civil rights organizing and rural multiracial grassroots theater where people come and listen to each other's stories, perspectives, and ideas and find common ground with people that they never ever thought they would find common ground with. This is an opportunity to learn from each other and learn a technique that you'll be able to take back home.
I'll take you to where it all began. Take you to donde comenzó todo. Todo comenzó. En este rancho, en este cementerio, in this cemetery, this is where it all started. Back in the 1800s, my great-great-grandfather had a plantation. He had slaves, had children. As the children grew up, he realized that slavery was not the best thing to have. And so he had his son, who was Nathaniel. Playmate was Matilda Hicks, who was a slave.
So the Jackson family, in their home property in Alabama, prior to coming to the Rio Grande Valley, lived in a rural agrarian area, farming. Nathaniel Jackson owned many acres of land and was considered a farmer in Alabama. His life partner, Matilda Hicks, had been a slave on his father's plantation back in Georgia. She was purchased by him as a 4-year-old girl in 1804. And at the time, Nathaniel was 6, and they grew up together on his father's property. And eventually, when Nathaniel became an adult, he was able to get his own property and farm his own land. So Matilda and Nathaniel started to have children in the late 1820s. Starting in 1840, when the Alabama census takers would count slaves on a farmer's property, Matilda and their children were just simply check marks on the census. And so Nathaniel, regardless of how he felt about Matilda and his children, had to consider them as slaves on his property.
To escape slavery, while most people were going up north, New York, Philadelphia, Boston, Michigan, they decided to come south. They knew that in Mexico there was no slavery. So their mission was to come to Mexico.
This family, after they arrived, immediately assimilated into Tejano culture. Took on Spanish names so they could blend into the community, learned how to speak Spanish. And in today's world, Spanish is their first language, and they consider themselves Mexican Americans.
We were like, it's called in Spanish a capitolotada, which means a mixture of a lot of things. Yes, it was danger. I remember hearing stories growing up that your grandmother is not all you think she is. Well, what does that mean? Well, one day I'll tell you. Your ancestors, the Jacksons, are what? Well, one day I'll tell you.
And the Jacksons were known at that time to being very benevolent, very caring and very giving to their neighbors and friends. So when travelers would come through wanting to continue on their journey into Mexico, whether they were general travelers or freedom seekers or self-emancipators, the Jackson family community would take them in, they would house them, they would feed them, and if they wanted to continue on their journey, they would assist them across the river from their licensed ferry landing that was adjacent to the property.
My great-grandfather gave these people that were escaping slavery the opportunity to go into Mexico if they wanted to, or to stay here.
We look at the history of how people were treated along the border. People of color have been treated along the border in Rio Grande Valley of Texas. We're not interested in adding to their family background the history of being African American, because then that would further result in marginalization and discrimination and just ugly feelings overall. So what's nice and exciting about this research today is that we are now in the 21st century. We are 20 years into the 21st century. And these family members are now not only acknowledging their family background, racially speaking, but they're embracing it and celebrating it.
With Martin and Espiridiona Jackson, these are the cornerstone of this place. Out of this couple here, all of my relatives are here. My aunts and my uncles, Tío Bene, Tía Adela, Tío Siquiel, todos están aquí. Perhaps the most influential person in my life next to my parents is my grandmother, Nancy Jackson. She's an incredible woman, raised 3 sons in the early 1900s, and she would tell me stories. 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, she would tell me stories. But she would never complete the story. I want this place to be that shining light for other people here that had to go through what I went through and pick up and write their own story and pick up to where they know. They don't have to be apologizing to anybody. So I tell people, never stop making contact. Never stop telling your story. Because if you do that, they will learn that they have also a story to tell. The border wall, come on. Another division? What does fences do? They just divide people. What does that fence represent? You're not welcome here? Remember, when you go through the checkpoint, they don't ask you if you are American, they ask you if you are a citizen of the United States. Because all of this is America. There's one thing that was taught to me, especially by my grandmother. Be of service to others. And when you present yourself to God, you will be there, and He won't ask you how many cars you have. He won't ask you how many buildings you have. So what did you do for your fellow man, He will ask you. And I will present my body to Him, and I will say to Him, you like what I have done with what you gave me? You like what I have done? This is what you gave me. I will be with you forever.
In April, the Jackson Ranch Church and Martin Jackson Cemetery received the notification of official acceptance to the National Park Service's Underground Railroad Network to Freedom program. Visiting the Jackson Ranch earlier this year was an honor, and hearing from Ramiro firsthand about his family and their legacy will stay with me forever, as will the surreal feeling of crossing through the border wall, a symbol of disconnection and dehumanization. Let's now turn to questions about how to tell if our democracy is at risk, the difference between rural rage and rural resentment, and how feelings of economic prosperity affect our political system. As we do so, I want to encourage everyone here today to register to vote if you're eligible and exercise your right to do so. Over now to Dee Davis, the president of the Center for Rural Strategies.
Welcome to Rural Assembly Everywhere. This is a great chance for us to talk with two powerhouse scholars, Kathy Kramer and Hari Hahn. Kathy is at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. Go Badgers. She has been one of the co-chair people of the Commission on the Future of the Economy, and has worked with Rural Assembly and with Whitney Kimball Cole, who's on that commission. Hari Hahn and I served together on the Commission on Democratic Practices, so this is kind of like a reunion, and I'm glad to get a chance to talk with you guys. I think that your full resumes will be on display for all the assembly goers, so great. So here's a question I'd like to ask both of you guys. It seems like for 40 years, I don't know, it seems like every 4 years we're told this is the most important election for the future of our democracy. If we don't vote this way or that way, we're going to lose the whole shebang. And each time it seems as if the rhetoric gets ramped up. There's more invective, there's more passion, more anger, and all of a sudden for poor schmoes like us, how do we know when the democracy's in peril? How do we know if we're at risk?
Some of it is just, Rick, right? To freak people out and scare them is a great motivator and a way to get people to the polls and get them to vote. And a lot of the challenges that people are facing are not new. It's not as if, say, the last 4 years or the last 8 years have suddenly brought, for example, like people's economic challenges about, right? I mean, people in rural communities, for example, have been a lot of folks have been really having a hard time making ends meet for decades, right? At the same time, I would say that the fact that Donald Trump it's not clear whether he will accept the results of an election, and the things he said about retribution to his political opponents once in office do make me wonder whether there is something to be said for this election is really important for the future of our democracy and the kinds of liberties that I think, myself included, have taken for granted for my life, for my entire life.
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, let me just say that it's really nice to be here, and thank you for the opportunity. And I always love having a chance to talk with you, Dee, and always with Kathy too. And I largely agree with what Kathy said. I think, it is true that I think too often people use that sense of threat as a way of trying to motivate people to turn out. And to your point, it can kind of lead to this cycle in which people tune out because it seems like, well, they told me it's a threat last time and we're still here. And so why would I pay attention this time? But I do think there is something unique about the challenges in this moment, particularly because things that we had taken for granted for a long time in our democracy just aren't taken for granted anymore. Things like the fact that, we may not have, the peaceful transition of power. There's certain kind of norms about political violence and democracy that I think people had taken for granted for a long time that no longer seem like things that we can necessarily assume will be true. And so there's a way in which I think it feels to me, as Kathy said, that even though I resonate with the sense that there's a way in which the challenges aren't new at all and that the sort of rhetoric around threat is certainly not new, I do think there is something potentially unique about this moment. But then maybe the other thing that I'll add is I do feel like the kind of cycle that you're describing is a sign of the way in which this moment that we're living in the 21st century is just one of tremendous uncertainty. You know, like the structure of our economy is changing, the socio-political dynamics are changing, technology is changing. I mean, we just live in a moment in the world when like everything is changing at once. And I think our political system in a way is struggling to catch up. Or like a metaphor that I always have in my head is it feels like all the balls are up in the air all at one time and we just don't know how they're going to land. And so everyone's trying to like, people are kind of grasping for different ways to try to make them land a certain way. And I think because of that uncertainty, there's this constant feeling of like, wait, is this it? Or is this it? Or is this it? You know? And so I don't know that I know the answer to when it's actually going to be it in a way, but I do think that uncertainty is a reality that we have to live with in this present moment.
In a recent New York Times piece about how data is being used to look at rural voter rage and racism and rejection of the system, Nick Jacobs from Colby College said there's a real difference between rural rage and rural resentment. Kathy, you wrote the book on rural resentment. What's your take on that and the difference?
Well, I agree with Nick. I think, in my mind, resentment is this feeling that it's not new to Donald Trump, right? But this sense that among many people in rural areas, you know, I'm a rural person and people like me, people around here are working hard and we're good people. And it doesn't seem to us that we're getting what we deserve, right? And we not in terms of stuff or money or resources, not in terms of attention from decision makers, and not in terms of respect even from people making those decisions. That's a kind of an undertone emotion. It's not necessarily rage or nastiness, but it can be turned into rage when the right politician comes along and says you're right to be so upset and you should be angry, and vote for me and I'll make America great again, right? And I think part of the undertone of that conversation, right, rage versus resentment, is the role of racism. So the White Rural Rage book that Times op-ed was in reference to, right, was saying, you know, really, when you boil all that resentment thing down and you really look at it, it's really about racism, really, right? It's really about white folks in rural areas being racist and that racism being fomented by candidates. And I don't want to downplay racism. I think racism is unfortunately a huge part of American political culture. But I would say that's not unique to rural areas. And I would say that the kind of resentment I heard in rural areas, that is this sense of, I'm not getting my fair share. I'm working my rear off, as is everybody I know, and still not getting ahead. Well, that's my sense of the difference.
Hari, I have a democracy question. You're the director of the Ed Gore Institute, the institute at Johns Hopkins on democracy. Go Blue Jays! And it seems to me that usually when we talk about democracy, we think about how we're registered or how we vote or how we govern or sometimes how others label us. But 2 years ago here in Eastern Kentucky, we had this devastating flood. 46 people were killed. Thousands were made homeless. And the acts of courage and heroism of people just coming out, and 1,400 people were saved from the water. People were nursed and nourished and sheltered, and it was done by locals, it was done by strangers, nobody with any sense of wanting a dime or recognition in return. They just did it. I'm interested in what the underlying tenets of democracy are. Is it about helping our neighbors, or is it about what's in it for me?
Yeah, I remember that flood. And, I think that a lot of times when people think about what democracy is, the first thing that people think about is like, Congress, like it's a building, where laws are made and there's a structure, it's a Supreme Court and it has these like pillars in front of it or something like that. But in my mind, part of the reason why I became a political scientist and part of the reason why I was drawn to trying to understand and study democracy is, to me, democracy is the work of people figuring out like how we want to forge a common life together, and that's a really hard question to answer. Anyone who's been in a family knows that it takes a lot of work, to make the family work. And, and I've got, I have a partner and 2 kids, and, it's the 4 of us in our household, and the 4 of us are like, just figuring out like where to go for dinner or what we want to have for dinner tonight or where we're going to take a vacation. Like it's a discussion, let me tell you. And if you, and we are all genetically related to each other, right? And so then if you take it and sort of multiply that out to a large society where you have millions of people who all come from really different backgrounds, who some live in urban areas and some live in rural areas, and some people were born in the United States and some people weren't, and just on and on and on. And you think about all the differences, then how does a community of people at a small or a large scale do the work of forging a common life together? And that's why it is important to have like structures and institutions and places where we begin to channel some of that decision making. But to get to your question of what's at the heart of it, I think, to your point, like when communities across America are in crisis, what we see is people recovering something very human, right? Which is the natural instinct to want to help each other. And that's true whether you are like me or whether you're not like me, that people have this desire to want to help their fellow person. And we see that emerge again and again. And so I think in some ways, the challenge of our politics in a lot of ways is like, how do we build a system that allows those natural instincts to come out? Because right now, the system that we have, the 2 parties, the candidates, like, all the different kind of trappings of what we think of as formal democracy are not really working that well. And I think there's a wide variety of reasons why that happened. But that doesn't mean that at the heart of it, you don't have a group of people who really are trying to answer that question of what does it mean for us to be in community with each other, and what are the commitments we're willing to make to each other or not. I think that there's some very basic questions there that still animate the work of democracy, or at least I like to think that they do at its very best.
About a year ago, we were finishing up doing a series of polling rural voters and looking at messages that resonate, and then doing special kind of focus groups in different parts, different rural communities. And in some ways, what we found wasn't that surprising. There was a kind of drift to the right by rural voters, but there were some things that I was surprised by. One was just what kind of economic populism we were seeing, and particularly how anti-corporate messages were resonating in rural areas, which I just was not ready for. And then in our focus groups, we heard these compelling messages, and the focus groups were focused on economic prospects. But let me just read you a few of these. This is from a participant in Ohio. If working made you rich, then day laborers would be millionaires. Just doesn't work that way. We listen to so much of this crap that poor people are indoctrinated with that. They carry that shame. Here's a participant from Wisconsin. There's a lot of loss in this room, and there will be. For those who haven't experienced it yet, they will. And here's a participant from Kentucky. The cavalry ain't coming. We're the cavalry. You have to make a stand and say, who's my neighbor out there? Him, her. I don't got much, but oh hell, for God's sake, these people got nothing. I'm interested in how much of democracy rests on the idea of one generation doing better than the last generation of I need to do better, or I need to do better for my kids, or my kids need to do better. How much of the system that we believe in really depends on a sense of economic prosperity?
That's a great question. I mean, in some respects, it rests too much on that idea of prosperity, right? In the sense of you're a good person or you've done well if you have experienced what social scientists call like social mobility, right? Where you earn more than your parents did. Where a lot of folks, like in those focus groups, Dee, if I remember right, and like in the ones we did for our commission, people just wanted stability. Like how I was talking about before, like this feeling of insecurity. They want to grow up in a place and get a job there and stick around their family like their dad or their grandma used to be able to, right? And so in some respects, there's this myth of prosperity, like that's the good life, like you achieve. Well, I'm not sure that's what people really want. They just want stability. They want enough to have the good life, which for a lot of people means a job that doesn't take away their dignity and ability to be and have a little bit of time with their loved ones.
So if you'll forgive me for a second for being like a little bit professorial in answering this question, there's a political scientist at Cornell, I think she just retired. Her name is Valerie Bunce, and she's a definition of democracy that I really love. And she sort of says, democracy is unique among all other forms of government because it requires that people accept uncertainty over outcome in order to have certainty over process, right? So like, I don't know in any given moment if my guy's going to win the election, right? If my party's going to win the election, I don't know if the policy that I want is going to pass. I don't know if, exactly what the impact of whatever government does is going to be on my family's economic fortune or something like that, right? But that what differentiates democracy is I accept that uncertainty because there's a certain set of rights and responsibilities that I commit to, that make me want to stay in the process, which is different if you think about like an authoritarian regime. Like if Russia has an election, like we know who's going to win, right? We know it's going to be Putin. So we know what the outcome is. We just don't know how he's going to get there, right? We don't know what the process is that's going to be to get there. So it's the opposite in other kinds of governments. And I think about that definition a lot in relationship to the question that you asked and what Kathy was just saying, because I think that I totally agree with what Kathy is saying. On the other hand, it's also true that like when we're asking people to do this really hard thing, which is to accept uncertainty over outcome, what happens when the range of outcomes we start to ask them to accept becomes too big, right? So if you're asking me to buy into a system where I may not know that my children are going to be able to have a healthy living, right? Or that I won't be able to feed my family, or that because of the color of my skin, I'm going to be threatened by the police, or like whatever the things are, then yes, I am more likely to withdraw from that system, right? Like it's a logical response when that range of outcomes becomes too broad. And so I think that what Kathy is saying is totally right, that, there are a lot of people who just that aren't necessarily kind of seeking, sort of constant advancement or just seeking kind of a stable life, but there has to be some sort of sense in which there's boundaries on how bad it can get, I think, and because of the uncertainty that we have right now, there are a lot of people out there who feel like, I'm not sure that, that I'm willing to accept how, the boundaries that you're asking me to accept. And I don't think that's totally unfair. And so it's, I think it's a work of government then to sort of narrow the range of outcomes that people are asked to accept, and for people to be able to have more voice in the process. So they feel like, like things aren't just going to happen to me, but I can put my hands on the levers of change.
So when Deb and Jim Fallows were doing their Our Towns work, book and television series. One of the things that intrigued me was the sense that they said that if they came into a town and asked what needed to be done, people would name the issues, and they would come together across lines and work together and laugh together and be good-natured and figure out solutions. And if they came into a town and asked politically, what side are you on, that the community immediately divided. People went into their corners, and it was hard to get them to come back together for this communitarian purpose. So I'm interested in, one, kind of how divided are we, and two, how do we rebuild trust? How do you rebuild faith or consent of the governed?
In my mind, that's part of a bigger problem, I think, where too many people experience politics as spectacle, where it's like a game that I watch other people play, and it's almost like amusement, right? And I, every now and then, every 4 years, I get to go and I get to pick this candidate or that candidate in the same way that I go to the store and I pick, Hunt's or Heinz ketchup or something like that. And in those situations, it's no surprise then identities are categorical, right? Because we're just watching a game. And so it's like the red team versus the blue team, or the, whatever the different teams are. And so I think what we really need to do is think about, how do we recreate a situation in which more people get to experience politics as experience, where identities aren't categories, but they are actual experiences that I have of other people, where, and as I think what I really liked about what the Fallows were describing is that when you ask people how to solve problems together, like, people have natural instincts and habits and ways of coming together to figure out how to solve problems together. But we don't give people that opportunity, and not often enough, And so in some ways, I think the question is, how do we recreate a system where more people are invited into opportunities to solve public problems together? And then sort of think about how those experiences can then be laddered up to shape a different experience about what politics can be.
I so agree with that. And I think this problem where when you ask people which side are they on, and that we do seem very divided in terms of partisanship, right? But then when you ask people, what are the big concerns around here, and what do you think we should do about them, and people come together, right? I think in part it's a big failure of our communication systems, both in social media and the way in which we engage with people on social media is not about conversation or seeing each other as humans, but these platforms are designed for us to provoke one another. That's how they grab our attention and keep us logged in, right? And so it's partly social media, but I think also, like, the evaporation of local media across the country takes away from people the ability to see maybe national issues, but it doesn't matter, but to see issues that are facing their community as issues facing their community, right? To have a forum in which people are thinking about and addressing what's going on right at their own doorstep. And I think local government, for me, is like a source of great hope, where if people can be re-engaged, like Hari's talking about, actually engage people in the work of democracy, and maybe not even call it politics, right? Just community problem solving. If people can be reminded that it's pretty straightforward how you do that, like, you actually just talk with one another and see each other as human beings. And people, like Hari said, like, if they have ideas about what should change, right, and what should be done, and if they can be not only re-engaged in that, but then shown, like, hey, look at what you just did. It had nothing to do with Democrats and Republicans. It's just about the community. That can, I hope, can restore people's sense of faith in democracy and in this thing that we demonize now that's generally called politics.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys. You're both just wonderful. This was wonderful, and welcome to the Rural Assembly. This is something that I'm going to enjoy for a long time.
Thank you for the invitation.
Yes, thank you so much. And like Harry said, just so great to engage with you both. Really great to have a moment.
It's bipartisan, the betrayal of rural.
The everyday people who maybe they do feel like they can't trust the government, they've been left behind by the government, but they're not as ideologically extreme as portrayed in the media. They're not the people that have 30-yard signs out. They're people kind of just going about their day-to-day lives.
I think the challenge is for our government structures to do a better job of recognizing the work that folks in rural communities are already doing.
The fact is that how one thinks about the economy is itself a cultural product.
They're tired of it. They're tired of people who are not rural telling them what to do and telling them exactly how to do what to do.
One has to be led down the road of thinking, well, what is it about rural communities' experience with government? What is it about rural communities' experience with the party of government? What is the rural difference?
What's one thing that you would see in an America where rural people are more engaged and better represented?
Hello everyone, I'm Lillian Salerno, Acting Deputy Undersecretary for Rural Development at the United States Department of Agriculture. I'm excited to connect with all of you virtually as you come together for Rural Assembly Everywhere 2024. I especially want to thank Dee Davis, who I've known for a long time, and hi Dee, and the Rural Assembly and the Center for Rural Strategies for bringing us all together. And you picked the perfect theme this year, nurturing thriving communities. That's exactly what we're focused on each day at Rural Development at USDA. We continue to partner with so many of you in helping our rural communities to thrive. Rural America, as you know, is the backbone of our country. In fact, I recently met someone at an event in Lubbock, Texas, who put it this way: rural America can get by without urban America. Urban America can't live without rural America. That's very true when you think about the farmers and ranchers and small town entrepreneurs we depend on to keep our country moving each day. But this isn't about us versus them. And I appreciate what you do to build back connections in rural places and to urban places. I want to work with you to continue that work of connection, and in particular, building partnerships across the lines of politics. Partnerships are one of the key priorities of the Biden-Harris administration's work in rural America. Our mantra is simple: when the people of rural America prosper, all of America prospers. That's why the Biden-Harris administration continues to make historic investments in rural America, including more than $375 million in USDA funding alone through programs focused on expanding clean energy jobs and economic development to grow the economy and keep rural communities strong and resilient. But even with the role that the federal government has to play, we know we don't have all the answers in Washington, D.C. We see these local investments as opportunities to build community capacity. We offer over 70 loan, grant, and technical assistance programs that empower local leaders and give them the resources they need to lift up their communities, strengthening rural infrastructure, connecting rural homes to high-speed broadband and safe water, and expanding rural access to affordable health care and more. In short, we appreciate your help to get the job done. You are our eyes, our ears, and our boots on the ground. The Rural Assembly plays a vital role in bringing together voices and leadership from across the nation to build a smarter, greener, and more inclusive rural America, no matter what zip code. Some of you know I grew up in a small town in North Texas, and in my graduating class there were only 18 people. And I'll admit it, I wasn't even in the top 5. In fact, I'm a first-generation college graduate, and I didn't know anyone who had ever graduated from college except for the teachers in the school that I went in rural Texas. We didn't have endless resources, but the sense of community was strong. It helped me develop a set of values and a work ethic that would allow me to pursue my dream of working in public service. And that foundation shaped who I am today. I think there's something about living in wide open spaces where everybody knows your name that makes you an individual. It toughens you up, and it gives you a sense of possibility when you look out on the horizon. And I see that in every rural community I visit today. One of the best parts about getting to go to work today for me is getting out in those communities and seeing the impact of our programs firsthand. I've been on the road a lot recently, including to communities in the Rio Grande Valley in my home state of Texas. I was just in South Texas to commemorate Home Ownership Week in June, focusing on our work helping more rural citizens realize the American dream of purchasing their first home. We visited a young couple with 2 small children who had moved from being ranch hands to owning their own home. That's the American dream. They worked hard for it, but the spirit of rural America isn't about pulling yourself up by your bootstraps alone. It's about coming together and helping your neighbor. So that's what was happening in South Texas. Thanks to a nonprofit organization, church volunteers, and our USDA housing programs, they built this house in less than 4 weeks. I'll never forget the look on their kids' faces as they picked out the colors for their new rooms. That's why we do what we do. I want to thank the Rural Assembly for their unwavering dedication and for being such a strong partner in our mission of revitalizing rural America. Your efforts, building coalitions, developing partnerships, getting out the word to the public make a difference each day. My hope is that each of you will come away from this conference with 3 actionable items that you can begin putting into practice at your organizations and in your communities right away. As we move forward, let's continue to nurture and support our rural communities. Together, we can create a more inclusive, prosperous future for everyone. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to the impactful discussions and stories that will emerge from this year's Rural Assembly Everywhere. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Scott Erickson, the Knox County Clerk here in Illinois, and President of the Illinois Association of County Clerks and Recorders. Today, I want to talk to you about some really special people in our rural communities, election administrators. Conducting an election is a unique experience. Election administrators across the country are under a tremendous amount of pressure. This is particularly true in rural areas, where we often find ourselves understaffed, under-resourced, and constantly adapting to a changing climate around election administration. The big counties draw the most attention, but our rural counties face the same problems and issues with more limited resources. Rural communities like ours are truly special. Did you know that nearly 60 million people live in rural areas across the United States? Here in Knox County, I love the sense of community that we share. When I go into town, I know I'll see neighbors I care about, people who look out for each other. The sense of belonging and mutual support is what makes rural America unique and strong. Being born and raised in a rural community, I'm proud to say that I've met some amazing people in my life, and I make it my personal goal to do my best for each of those residents in Knox County. I work hard for them and cherish the trust that they've placed in me for the last 20 years. Sometimes I feel like Norm from the 1980s sitcom Cheers. Everybody seems to know my name. My kids used to get so upset when we'd go out because I seem to know everybody. Now, you don't get that kind of opportunity in a big county. But now, more than ever, we need to look out for each other. Our election officials can really use the support of the rural community leaders at this time. Here here are 3 ways that you can help election administrators before the upcoming general election. First, you can join us in celebrating Election Hero Day. It's a day that's dedicated to showing our gratitude to the people who work tirelessly to ensure our elections run smoothly and fairly. Visit www.electionheroday.org to learn more about how you can participate and why expressing our thanks is so important. Next, you can sign on to support more federal funding for rural election offices. The Election Infrastructure Initiative has a petition that you can sign to make your voice heard. Head over to electioninfrastructure.org to sign the petition and show your support for the resources we need to serve our communities effectively. And thirdly, consider becoming a poll worker. I know we are always struggling to find poll workers each election. Elections would not run if we didn't have poll workers who are willing to serve. It's a great way to do your civic duty and to be a helpful part of the electoral process. Organizations like Power the Polls, Vet the Vote, or your local election office can help you get involved. Poll workers are essential to the electoral process, and your participation can make a significant difference. Now, we're more than halfway through the year now, which means that elections are just around the corner. Our rural communities need to stand together to ensure that every vote counts and every voice is heard. By supporting your local election officials, you're helping to strengthen our democracy and uphold the values that make our community great. And I know they'd really appreciate your support. Thank you for your time, your support, and your dedication to our community. Let's work together to make this election season just a bit brighter for our neighbors who make elections happen. Thank you.
We are La Unión del Pueblo Entero is a beautiful community union founded by Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta. Part of the work that we do at La Unión del Pueblo Entero, it's aimed to meeting the needs of the community we serve. The developments of the colonias in South Texas started to happen because agricultural land was no longer suitable for farming. And so developers started plotting these lots and selling the lots without any infrastructure. They didn't have sidewalks, they didn't have paved roads, they didn't have sewage, lighting. And so these are some of the issues that we address in the colonias.
I didn't understand this concept of colonias because I don't think a lot of people do. So I think when I started learning about how they were defined, why wasn't there any support? They're paying all the taxes, they're contributing to society, so why don't they have all these resources?
Over a decade ago, probably 2, we took on the issue of streetlights.
Colonia es bien oscura. Había veces que teníamos que salir con los teléfonos a dejar a los niños en la esquina, y más cuando es escuela de verano que te los dejan en la calle principal. Ahí era bien riesgoso porque en veces dejaban niños menores de edad y en veces había vecinos, iban y se ponían con sus carros a alumbrarnos porque no había nada y pues es calle que pasan los carros bien recio.
We take public light so for granted because we see it everywhere. Like we drive through the street, you're kind of like, oh, it's public light. But then like you go into the colonias, you're kind of like, oh shit, it's dark here. Like there's nothing's here. Or there's not that there's nothing here. There's definitely a lot of people there, but you just can't see anything. When I remember what kind of got me more agitated about the public light, when I was going north on 107, like at 6 a.m., it's pitch black. And I remember I was driving down the street and I just kept seeing like these little yellow dots on the side of the road. And I was kind of like, what the hell? So I just kept driving and driving. As I got closer, I saw that they were kids. And it tripped me the hell out because I was like, dang, I thought it was deer. I remember thinking like, man, like if I can help this, I'm gonna do it. Like, so in 2016 is when they won the Texas law for colonias to apply for public light.
When they proposed all this thing, we have to go to Austin and ask for it so they can approve it, say yes or no. So at that time, I remember clearly, and I still have nervous because for me there's a big people over there in the capital, and they talk to you and ask you questions, and my English is not too good, and I keep thinking what they say, and I remember clearly they asked me, but do you know you have to pay for it? I say, yes. And your neighbors, are they ready to pay? They okay to pay? So yes, we know we have to pay.
And the commissioners at the time and the judge, I remember, laughing in my face and said, that legislation is worthless. It doesn't have nothing that forces people to do anything. There doesn't say how. It doesn't say where the money is going to come from. It doesn't say anything. It just what it says is the people in the colonies do not have light. And so I was very, like, my eyes open, and I said, so what do we need to do? And so he said, you're not going to be able to do that. The people are not going to be able to do that. And I remember so clearly that they said, when pigs fly, you'll be able to do that, because there is no way that this county is going to afford to have put lights in colonias, and there is no way that it's going to happen.
En el 2017 pasó la ley de la luz pública, entonces yo regresé a esas colonias a decirles, ya ganamos, ya hay una ley que podemos tener luz pública. Entonces de ahí en adelante, entonces ya les expliqué que era la ley, que teníamos que tener el 75% de las firmas. Entonces la gente empezó a levantar las firmas.
We have to be the agents of the change. We have the ability, we have the responsibility, and we can do it. But the thing is, our job is tough to kind of, I would say, peel the onion and convince people about their own powers.
Yo comenté con una señora de una colonia de enfrente, le digo, porque yo miraba que estaban poniendo la luz allá. Y yo le dije que cómo le hacían, cómo podría yo hacer para que hubiera luz pública en mi colonia. Y ella dijo, te voy a presentar con Marcos. Y este Marco nos ayudó bastante, ¿verdad? Primero nos dijo que empezáramos a hacernos miembros de la Lupe, ¿verdad? Que nos ha dado buenos beneficios en todas maneras. Y luego ya que comenzáramos a juntar vecinos y a hacer las juntas en mi casa.
I think for the valley, for the lack of resources, for the isolation that we always are, for the poverty that exists, we're still living in minimum wage here. The only way that we can create that change necessary for people to have more, to live with more dignity is to organize. That's the power that we have.
Entonces es cuando nos dieron la noticia de que sí nos iban a dar la luz pública, pues yo me sentí más contenta de que mis hijos iban a venir a casa bien, de que cuando salieran pues ya la gente ya camina, ya juega pelota, cuando no hacíamos nada de eso, ya nos ponemos a platicar afuera. Gracias a Marcos, a la organización de Lupe, hubo la petición, nos aceptaron.
It was a lot of work, but at the end we were guided by the need of the people, and we were guided by the people who needed these services in the communities. And this is how we able to accomplish this, something that the commissioners do not believe that was possible.
7 años hemos estado trabajando alumbrando colonias, y pienso yo que ya tenemos más de 40 colonias que se han alumbrado en estos 7 años. Y hemos visto el cambio de vida de la gente, porque ahora como que los niños se sienten mejor, hay más seguridad, pueden caminar también los niños en la calle. Entonces yo estoy bien contenta con ver hecho un poquito de esfuerzo con ellos, porque en realidad el trabajo lo hacen ellos. Nosotros nomás estamos para apoyarlos.
With Lupe, you feel this, how do you say it? Well, you can do everything. You can do everything because you have the people who, with you.
I dream of the day that we can light up all the colonias in the counties that we work in. Because since we started doing this work, we're averaging anywhere between 5 to 8 colonias a year that get lit up. It's a monumental legislation that not only impacts colonias in the Rio Grande Valley in South Texas, but it also impacts across the state of Texas. And this is the power of the community union that Lupe has built over the years.
This is probably the best view from here. You can just see it right down through there. It's the world's largest radio telescope. They listen for, I'm not sure what, maybe extraterrestrials.
When I was 13, we took a trip up to the observatory, and I was just like in nerd heaven.
It's an interesting discrepancy that we have this incredibly advanced, cutting-edge science and engineering going on in this fairly rural environment.
Some lovely decorations on the tree.
Welcome to West Virginia. When I got here, I was told that there was no Wi-Fi here. AT&T cell coverage completely covers everywhere but that dot.
The reason the telescope exists is because we're in a radio quiet zone. When you think about all that technology out there, all of that provides noise to our radio signals. If that signal's only coming once, and if your cell phone is on at that time, we might miss it.
We have what's called an interference protection group he can scan for. Cell phones, even Wi-Fi.
Oh, there's our first hit.
They picked up an electric toothbrush one time.
I do daydream a lot about what it would be like to work at Green Bank. I can just imagine making my own observations with a telescope.
The proposed action is to substantially reduce the funding of the Green Bank Observatory.
If the Green Bank Observatory were to close, it would have a devastating effect.
I love the fact that my kids don't grow up holding onto these devices.
They're missing the point if they think they're just studying stars, because they're shaping a lot of young minds.
The everyday questions that occur here somewhere else would be the once-in-a-lifetime question.
If we were to find that there was somebody else out there, we could learn how did they survive. On the flip side of that, if we don't find anything, that would mean that it's extremely important for us to preserve our planet, to preserve our existence as a species.
It's hard for me to understand why God would make this whole universe and put human beings in just one place.
I think they're out there somewhere. But we should get better TV with a dish that big.
Hi, my name is Francesca, also known as Frankie Volts, and I'm a writer living on traditional Ho-Chunk land in Viroqua, Wisconsin. And I'm so delighted to share with you today a project called Dear Beloveds, which is an ongoing collective love letter to all beings in the universe. And this project came into being on a show and tell tour that I co-organized with Debbie Rasmussen, where we hosted all ages show and tells at stops around the US. And on that tour, my show and tell share was reading from a long poem entitled Dear Beloveds, addressed to all beings on the planet. And after I'd read from that poem, I'd invite others to write their own Dear Beloveds and then read them aloud to the group, because I just absolutely love the magic that happens when spaces come alive with other people's voices and stories. So I'm going to share a bit from my own Dear Beloveds poem while holding up cards that others have written, so you can kind of get both of those voices weaving together. Dear Beloveds, I understand that to address this poem to an entire planet, but to write it only in English is problematic. This is a small beginning. Dear Beloveds, when I lift my head skywards to scan for stars, feet pushing pedals, pushing bike forward, some of you are most likely doing the same. Some of you also decoding satellites and constellations. Some of you catching the pink bloom of sunset. Some gauging the gray to guess when the sun will break through again. Some of you praying for rain to relieve whatever is thirsty. Some of you tossing queries like dice up to Orion, to Ursa Major, as they diamond carve their way across night. Dear Beloveds, I have not heard or read the news in 7 days, but most likely some of you were mentioned or pictured there. Most likely some of you died in ways that no human was ever meant to, leaving some of you grieving in groves of trees where my dawn is your sunset. Some of you grieving in your living room down the block in a house I've never entered, though I've probably said hello to you, while you kneeled in your front yard patch of alyssum or cosmos, separating weeds from blooms and tugging at the root. Some of you are walking over the arc of the bridge between worlds at this moment. Some deaths in hospital beds, some deaths far from home. And by the time I reach the end of this stanza, some of you will have completed your crossing, and I am extending blessings, unfurling from ribcage like ribbons in the wind. Some of you might ask, who the hell are they to extend their blessings? Which choruses well with the questions I ask myself, but I extend anyway and leave you to choose whether or not to accept. Dear beloveds, I want to believe in all of you, and I do, but I get confused because some of you happen to be officers in the U.S. Army that condone things like taking photos of your soldiers at Abu Ghraib with thumbs up while hovering over the corpses of tortured detainees. Some of you are glad that Matthew Shepard is dead, and you would do it all over if you had to. Some of you believe in the need for a border wall while you forget California, Nevada, Utah, New Mexico, and most of Arizona and Colorado and parts of Oklahoma, Kansas, and Wyoming used to be Mexico. Some of you has pushed yourself beyond someone else's boundaries. Some of you have done so more than once. I understand that there is a great need for healing among us. I understand that if you grew up taking the blows, then you are more likely to deliver them. Right now, one of you is bringing your fist to someone else's jaw. Right now, one of you is pointing a gun at someone else's body. If this poem could do anything, I'd will it to lasso the bullet back into the gun, to bind the severed flesh, to unclench the fist, to fuse bone back to bone. I'd will this poem to ferry you, beloveds, into safety. So take a look at the chat for more information, and if you'd like to contribute your own, if you'd like to read more of other people's contributions, or read the longer version of my piece. Thank you so much.
Abundant mindset, we can create the worlds where everybody can get a slice when they need.
Instead of feeling like we need to compete against each other, I know for a fact that when one of our venues does well, all of our venues does well. And that means more people getting to gather in different places and experiencing different things together. Definitely means more prosperity for all of us all the time.
I think what's powering our shared prosperity for me is dreaming. My tagline is I'm your dream life type chick, and I just feel like so many people don't get the opportunity to connect their dreams to reality, and there's so much that comes out of people doing things that light them up, and there's a magnetism that happens when people are excited. And I think there's so many creative, unique people in rural communities that being able to see people really step into something that gives them a lot of energy and hope and camaraderie. I think that just powers something that is so connective. It's the connective tissue of our communities in my mind.
I think it means that artists and creatives are supported in their own communities, especially in rural communities. I think that a lot of times it's the artists and the creatives who bring new ideas, new passions, new points of view into communities that oftentimes can seem like maybe a bit stagnant or a bit traditional or a bit stuck in the past. It's often that sort of sometimes called rebellious energy that allows for communities to survive and to thrive for themselves, because if tradition is the thing that you mostly build your world around without innovation, then you're going to be stagnant and your communities are sooner or later going to die. So I think that supporting artists and creatives means like allows for us to support everyone else in the community as well.
I'm excited by the prospect of the shared prosperity, because when one of us succeeds, it helps all of us in this shared community.
I think it comes natural or easy to indigenous communities because we have this idea of manaji itawin, which means like shared respect is that, or working together. But what comes to mind is being able to come forth on the table for other, like in divergent mutualisms of leadership, and then working together to kind of teach non-native communities what our example of the idea of shared wealth, shared knowledge.
It means remembering to play, remembering to seize the moments of joy that become available to you. That's what it means to me.
Hello, Rural Assembly friends and neighbors. My name is Anna Clausen with Voices for Rural Resilience.
And my name is Ash Hansen with Department of Public Transformation. We are the co-hosts of Beyond the Clock, a monthly digital happy hour and learning exchange for rural connectors and cultural workers.
About 5 years ago, Ash and I started hosting these informal virtual spaces, connect and share practices and perspectives, with each event creating its own little community around our virtual happy hour table.
Our goal from the outset was to create connections that help sustain work that often feels physically, socially, and emotionally isolating. Our perspective is that rural connectors and cultural workers often oscillate between the need to belong in their community and the need to intentionally, sometimes not belong, by leading the way in embracing new cultures, values, and attitudes.
Operating in this space requires vulnerability, courage, discomfort, self-love, and grace. We invite and model these qualities and approaches when we gather in community virtually, so that we can gain new approaches and ideas for continuing to lead our rural communities forward, embracing all that is good from our past with all that we want to become.
We know that those of you attending Rural Assembly Everywhere lead with these values, and we want to get to know you better. So on August 7th at 1 p.m. Central, you are invited to join us for a special edition of Beyond the Clock Happy Hour, to have an opportunity to share, reflect, and dive deeper into the themes and ideas that are uplifted during Rural Assembly Everywhere.
We will gather with the hopes of each of us leaving a little lighter, brighter, and more connected, and with extra wind in our sails, to go forward and integrate all of the amazing offerings from everywhere into our community work and lives.
We hope you will join us at our virtual table on Wednesday, August 7th, and we will welcome you into the Beyond the Clock community. See you there.
I hope to see you at Beyond the Clock next week, and be sure to check out their future gatherings too. We've got much more to come, but I want to take a moment to thank our incredible team who helped put this Rural Assembly Everywhere together. Joel Cohen, Tracy Staley, Florentina Curdy, and all of our colleagues at the Daily Yonder and Center for Rural Strategies, as well as the Rural Assembly Strategic Advisors. By the way, if you're interested in joining our team at Rural Assembly, we'll be sharing more information soon about a Rural Assembly Fellow focused on welcoming, inclusion, and immigration in partnership with our friends at Welcoming America. There will be an interest form in the chat, and I hope you'll consider joining us. We've got more conversations ahead, but just in case some of you have to leave at the hour, I want to share the link to our survey about Everywhere. Your feedback is critical to our ability to create programming which speaks to the moment and the needs of our big nationwide community. Please take a moment to fill this out. And for those of you who are with us through the end of today's program, stay tuned for the raffle of an Everywhere t-shirt, as well as some stickers. So next up, I'm excited to introduce a panel with 3 incredible museum and historical society leaders who are going to talk about how their institutions can serve their communities. I'll turn it over now to Stephen Gong, who will bring us into this conversation.
Hello, everyone. I'm Stephen Gong, and I am moderating a special panel we have today for the rural assembly everywhere. And the subject of our panel is going to be on agency, storytelling, and community voice through local historical societies. I'd love to start with Madeline Matson, who is the executive director of the Columbia Pacific Heritage Museum in Ilwaco, Washington, at the mouth of the mighty Columbia River. And Madeline, tell us, if you wouldn't mind, more about your museum and a little bit about this idea that I introduced in the title of the panel.
Yeah, so like you said, I'm with the Columbia Pacific Heritage Museum. We're a small rural history museum located in Ilwaco. We focus on the history of our region. So we start with the Chinook Indian Nation and the culture of the Chinook, and then we move through time and talk a lot about the life ways of people who have lived in our community over time. And I'm constantly thinking about how to try to keep our small budget, small institution, small staff organization alive and relevant. And I think that museums like ours are really starting to take on different roles in the community and more civic-centered roles in the community. And honestly, hopefully starting to provide maybe more services to our community as well, outside of just kind of the core mission of protecting and interpreting the history of our communities.
Great, thank you, Madeline. We'll get back to explore some of those issues more deeply, but I wanted to emphasize what I understand, and it's absolutely true. Rethinking the mission, in a sense, the services of a local history museum. I'd like to turn now to Francisco Guayado, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Museum of South Texas in Edinburgh, Texas. And I also want to mention to this gathering that Francisco is a former board member of the Center for Rural Strategies, which is the kind of a parent organization to Rural Assembly. And so Francisco has spent a lifetime of really a professional lifetime of helping guide this whole idea of bringing together rural voices and rural communities. And I wanted to especially point that out. Francisco, as the CEO of the museum, and that's a longer standing, you're not the founder, but tell us where you're at on this idea of civic service and what the mission of the museum.
Hello, Stephen, and my new friends, Madeline and Gwendolyn. I was the chair of the Center for Rural Strategies board, Stephen, until Stephen coached them one day, and they said, "Hey, this guy's a little bit better, so let's give him the chairmanship." But I had such a fun stay while on the board with the Center for Rural Strategies, and for a number of reasons. I think it spoke to me and my own life story. I think it spoke to me as a rural person. It spoke to me as a Mexicano who was born in Mexico and came across as a kid into a community where the stories of my parents, had not been elevated to the extent that I thought they should be, kind of instinctively is what I thought. I came up as a teacher and then became a university professor for almost 20 years. And 5 years ago, I became the CEO of the Museum of South Texas History. The museum has almost a 60-year history as a regional museum whose purpose is to preserve and present history, heritage of South Texas and northeastern Mexico. So we really do have an international quality. The river has been very fluid through a number of centuries. And so our purpose is really to capture the history of that, to preserve it. So we have a strong and vibrant archive. A number of researchers come into our archive, serious historians, serious people from the community who want to explore their own history, their own genealogy. And so how do we become different, useful, and meet our purpose all at the same time is really part of this menu of questions that we grapple with every single day as we try to be good to our community.
Wonderful, wonderful, Frank. I'm Francisco. And right off, I just have to observe what's interesting on our panel is we have three institutions here, really at different stages of their work. So I want to now turn to Gwendolyn Trice, who is the executive director of the Maxville Heritage Interpretive Center in Wallowa County, Oregon. And Gwendolyn, your site, the story is absolutely remarkable because you're developing something, a local history museum that is quite unique because it's arising out of a community that is even mentioned as a ghost town, that had a certain history of settlement, and you're trying to recover that, utilizing many different voices, folks that used to live there, but also the local community. Will you tell us how this came about and what your chief mission is in developing the Heritage Interpretive Center?
Thank you. And it's so good to be here with Madeline and Francisco and Stephen today. I am the founder of the organization and a descendant of the African-American loggers that lived, worked, went to school in Maxville, that town. And really not having known about my own history in Oregon and growing up in a rural place, I was really drawn to coming home and being able, after 30 years, to come home and say, I have a voice here, and a community of people have voices here that no one's telling. It's that idea of our hidden history and not getting this type of education growing up in the spaces in the 60s, in the 70s. And it was imperative to me to come back home and tell this story, not only through my voice, but the voices of the people who really can't speak for themselves anymore, and to make awareness for the descendants of these multicultural logging communities, and really that the passion for telling an inclusive American narrative has been really driving a lot of all of the body of work. And as we really look at the physical space we have a fairly small museum in the town of Joseph, Oregon. The town of Maxville was 96 acres. We purchased 240 acres, so we have the surrounding timber. And this sense of how it connects to the Nez Perce before colonization, how it connects to the home, the people who homesteaded on the land, and then looking forward to we're making history today on this site, and we're bringing in the next generations of youth leadership. I think that makes it strong and keeps it moving forward.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Thank you each. Now that maybe I should just observe that each of you has spoken a little bit about this need to be relevant, the need to serve the community in a new and different way. There was specific reference to coming out of the pandemic, and the challenges that face every kind of institution and every effort in our culture, what we hold on to. And then the recognition that we may need to rethink for this new, it feels like we're in a new chapter, right, in our society and culture. And I think there's a real recognition of the vital role that you can play in your communities. But one of the first things I guess I wanted to say, and maybe I'll go back to you, Madeline, because in some ways the presentation of the Columbia Pacific Heritage Museum is that it helps instruct visitors to the story of the local community. And I think for a lot of local history museums, I guess the first piece is just to preserve, these artifacts and the recognition that they're of importance. But the second one is you're generally setting up the interpretation for visitors who don't know your story. And I think that's where that's kind of the background of local history museums. What does that make you think about in terms of who you're serving, and how does that reflect it in your work?
Yeah, we have predominantly, we ride a weird line because at the core of what we do is collecting and holding artifacts and important things to our community that comes directly from people in the community. Everything that we have was gifted to us. We don't buy anything for our collection. So that we rely on the community, and yet we are interpreting that information and presenting it and exhibiting it really in the past, especially primarily for tourists. And while we do have an incredible base of local members and locals who come in regularly, a lot of our funding comes from tourism-based sources like lodging tax dollars. And so in order to get those, we have to prove that we are providing a tourism-based service. So it is kind of an interesting line there. And I think that especially when we were closed during the pandemic, I came on as director about 3 months or so into the pandemic. And so for me, it was thinking about when we were reopening, why should we reopen? What is the purpose of us? Is this really just for tourists? Because we're probably not going to have a lot of tourists coming through the doors for the next year or more. So what is the point? Why are we here? Why does the community care that we're closed, or why we reopen? So when we reopened, we actually became free. We were an admission-based museum before that. And I decided that if what our mission is really preserving and interpreting our community's history, why should someone coming through the door have to pay to see their grandmother's sewing machine? That just seemed wrong to me. And we have seen so many more local people coming through the door that would maybe come in once every 5 to 10 years. Or maybe if their grandkids were in town, they'd bring them through once. But now they're coming in every 6 months to see what our new special exhibit is, and they don't have to pay, and they can bring their grandkids as many times as they want, and they don't have to pay. And that benefits tourists too.
Thank you, Madeline. And just in a moment, I'm going to invite this conversation across ways. I don't mean to hold on to this, but I want to maybe just surface a couple of other key ideas that I'm seeing in the panel today. And Francisco, I'd like to explore further something that you mentioned about about your institution being more international in flavor, and the fact that you are Mexican American. And I'm guessing that you would be the first, Mexican American CEO of this 60-year-old institution. And I'm thinking that in some ways, what we've all experienced in a way is re-examining American history in the last, 10 or 20 years, and really rethinking the stories that we tell about our own history.
For many years, Stephen, there was a perception, a community perception, that this museum was the museum for the white people, and which is not uncommon in the museum world. And the museum was founded by Anglo ranching families, and so they made the big investment and continue to make investments in preserving their history and the history of the region. And I used to visit the museum here mostly to use the archives, as a researcher, as a historian. I never really walked the galleries. The exhibitions were really not something that I consumed like I did the archives. But then when I applied for the job and came to visit, I thought, what the galleries are and what the perception is could be two different things. And I came to realize that it's really in the interpretation. It's in the interpretation of the exhibits. Who's telling the stories matters a lot. And so I think that for me as a historian, part of my, purpose was to help this museum tell the story in different ways. And it's also a museum that is beginning to explore the indigenous narratives of this region. If you're from South Texas, and we got 15,000 kids who come through here every single day, and you look at the phenotype of the kids, and the indigeneity is clear. Yet no child knows of their tribal allegiance. There's a story, 1788, from when a Franciscan priest was baptizing native children, native families in Laredo, Texas, Laredo, when he lines up 25 indigenous people, and in one fell swoop, he baptizes all of them, and he gives them the name De La Cruz. And he goes on to the next group, and he gives them the name Garza. And on and on and on. With one fell swoop, you do the practice of erasure. And these kids do not go back to a reservation because the state of Texas does not allow reservations. So the idea of how do we explore our Coahuiltecan, our Carancawa, our Kickapoo ancestry is a very, very challenging proposition that had not really been engaged. And even when you're Francisco, they change it to Frankie when you go to the first grade. It is this lifelong quest for identity, a search for name, a search for story, a search for who you are, all in this place that we call a museum.
Thank you, Francisco. Always wonderful to hear you. You're inspiring. And Gwendolyn, I could see you nodding through this. It's right. It's what you're doing now. And it's so exciting to see this unique formation of a history center of the future. But please share with us what resonates with you on the complexity of telling a challenging history, because there's so much disruption in it, and the fact that the black logging families were living in segregated conditions, and in some ways you're coming back though to try to tell that whole story and connect it to the native people. How do you approach this question of reclaiming a history?
It is complex. However, I'm driven by making connections to each individual as best I can. So I think about approaching it holistically in how it connects to who we are and where we come from. In Oregon, when Maxville was a town, it was the 1920s, so the Klan was really strong in this region, and it was it wasn't anything people weren't used to that were recruited to Maxville, because a lot of the whites and blacks were recruited from the South and the Midwest. For some people, it was an experience that they were comfortable with, being separate. And for the homesteaders that were already there, a lot of them came from West Virginia. They came out of the coal mines. They came from another industry that segregated. And I mean, the average age of the men that lived in coal mining industry were like 39 years old. And they came out of those spaces. So when people started making connections back then with each other, a lot of the homesteaders didn't have the same biases or experiences, and that's where a lot of the relationships began to build in the space. And then I think about my relationship with the tribes, and I've had an opportunity when making a connection with the Nez Perce that were driven out of the county. I go into Idaho. It's not very far away, about an hour and a half lap way. And I speak with the tribal council about, here's who I am. Here's my dream. Here's where I come from. What is interesting to me, I've had folks say, well, don't go to these people to speak, or don't go there because they're really racist. And as soon as they say that, I I go there and say, hi, would you like to talk? And they're, well, I've been waiting for you to call me. Everybody wants their voice to be a part of it because they remember, and it's their history. And so I find that I continually learn how to sit and listen versus coming in to try to create a scenario, create a menu of what it is. I'm lifting the voices, lifting the story, understanding that when people tell me information about the past, they use terms, derogatory terms that were everyday terms for us, and nicknames that eliminated our last name. That erasure continues to happen. And so if I were to do this work without including the people that came before us, I would not be doing that. I would not be hearing the management of the land that we now own, which I consider a temporary steward of the land, because people lived on the land for thousands of years and it was taken from them. It was stolen from them. And so I think of that investment as I'm temporary to do because we don't know the future, but we're building the framework, that foundation toward the future by having just being honored by the first peoples that were here before us, so that we manage it in a good way, so that we're telling the stories in a good way, so that we are bringing it to the voices of the people that support us, not just the community, but our senators. And the governor declared Maxville Heritage Day, that Black history is American history, it's Oregon history. So we get these layers, not just locally, but other voices that are saying the same things, that are making decisions for us and helping to support the funding of this body of work.
Wonderful, Gwendolyn. Thank you so much. And I know that this must resonate to all the folks watching the panel today. Thank you very much. Thank all of you. It's been a wonderful time. I'm a buzz. I hope everyone out here watching the panel connects this to the stories in your own communities. I hope you will take a moment to support local history, and to make it, and to realize how expansive it is, taking the past we share, and then serving the communities of today, always with that thought about the communities of the future, the young people we have, and enriching their lives, and having them also re-examine all aspects, the troubling, the authentic, the true. The human animal is a complex one, and that the better angels of what we can do together really comes from a deeper understanding and a sense of connection to one another. So thank you all, and thank you for joining us, and have a great rest of the assembly.
My name is Eliza Blue. I am a folk singer, a writer, and a shepherd here in western South Dakota. And I'm going to share a song with you today that is from a folk opera I'm working on called The Grass Widow. It's the story of a woman who is abandoned out on the prairie by her lover and is forced to spend the winter alone. And what she discovers is, even though she's the only human, she is actually just one member of a thriving community in that ecosystem, and that the members of that ecosystem, the plants, the animals, the trees, in fact, a cottonwood is one of the main characters, which is why I came out here to play this song for you, that they all come together and teach her what true love and what true thriving really feels like. So this is the first song, though, from the opera, where she is just reckoning with her partner leaving her alone with winter coming on.
against the hard loom of your love. I scuttle back and forth 'cause you're leaving, weaving fast with twine and leather to tie this whole thing back together. Hold me closer, hold me closer. Autumn branches, tired of dancing, gray and twisted. Hold me. I search the fields like only tattered. The meadowlark's gone, but left her feathers. Day is breaking, the weather's changing. The robins fled and left me waiting. Hold me closer, hold me closer. Autumn branches, tired of dancing, gray and twisted. Hold me against the hard loom of your love. I scuttle back and forth 'cause you're leaving.
Hello, I'm Bonita Robertson-Hardy,
And I'm Chris Estes.
and we're co-executive directors of the Community Strategies Group at the Aspen Institute. We all know that there's an urgent need for equitable and flexible grant making to enhance rural prosperity and well-being. Today, we'll share a few recommendations and insights from a report that we published with Partners for Rural Transformation. For this report, we convened 40 rural economic and community development practitioners from rural and Native nation communities across the United States. We know that equity and inclusion are critical for the work that we're all doing. All of our work at Aspen Community Strategies Group is grounded in the lens of race, place, and class equity. And this report particularly calls for funders to adopt more inclusive strategies and approaches to ensure that rural communities, especially those that have been historically marginalized, receive the support that they need.
The report underscores the traditional funding models that often overlook these communities and exacerbate existing disparities. Typically, rural regions are only offered episodic and transactional funding that allow them to do specific projects, but rarely build any capacity or, frankly, community consensus. The report does recommend several strategies, including simplifying the application process, meeting in the community versus foundation or funder offices to emphasize the share of power, and providing capacity building support. This involves understanding the specific needs and context of these communities and providing flexible funding that can adapt to local conditions, as well as reducing administrative burdens like not requiring match funding in lower capacity region, as well as having rural set-asides. This is especially true at the federal and state level.
Partnerships are vital to success, and funders should collaborate with local organizations that have a deep understanding of rural challenges and opportunities. This is oftentimes the most difficult work to get funded. An example of how to do this is to hire staff from the local community or region, since they have a better understanding of their community.
By adopting these recommendations, we hope to create a more equitable and prosperous future for rural communities across the country. Check out the full report on our website, aspencsg.org. Thanks to you and your work for strengthening equitable rural prosperity.
Are you like me, somebody who's really concerned about just how polarized we've become as a nation? Do you wonder what caused the rural-urban divide and what the heck can we do about it? Well, if you have those questions and concerns, I encourage you to come to the workshop on Tuesday, August 6th at 2 p.m., a follow-up to the Rural Assembly Everywhere. I'm Anthony Flacavento, founder and director of the Rural Urban Bridge Initiative, and I hope to see you then. Thanks.
Montezuma County has maybe 10,000 trees that are between 70, 80, and 120, 130 years old. It's the largest collection of old orchard trees in the country. Montezuma Orchard Restoration Project works to preserve Colorado's fruit-growing heritage and restore an orchard culture and economy here to the Southwest region. Early on, we realized that the best possible use of this nearly 50,000 bushel potential crop was to turn it into juice. So Laura stepped in and helped us to get the big bins to put a lot of bushels into, and then the bushel crates themselves, so that people have the ability to harvest their apples and bring them into us to where they can be processed. It's been very successful. It's building. It's a patient occupation of doing what we do consistently so that people see that if they pick their crops now and take care of their trees, they actually have a market, and that just takes time to build.
At least I'm not as picky as a Carolina wren. Though Jim must build us another sink, a third one, with a shallow charm to easing our backs, I insist he lower the bar to counter height for chopping and rolling out dough without cricking my neck. And often sag copper gutters would look best. But I'm not after a whole other house, like this wren making her mate build nest after nest until one suits her. All the others whose leaves he wove lacy and soft, and all that labor is left to be blown away. I'd rather Jim build me the river I crave. But this is all we got in us, we say, shaking our heads at how we shouldn't have depended on silicone, that filler of fake tits, to seal our walls. Making do requires bracing the foundation post, sistering rafters, adding fascia boards to block out rain, outwitting our walls. So I'm demanding no more experiments, no more makeshift. The rest has to be made for keeps. I think through closets and pantry, figure just how I want the sink. I swear to make do if it's not just right. This isn't settling. This isn't as an anything is enough if you know how poor you are sort of thing. Look at how even the pickiest wren chooses the nest built in our eaves.
Encouraging technology in our community is helping to shape a new wave of entrepreneurs, if you will. I think entrepreneurs are super valuable in terms of being able to be more resilient. So the more people we have here in our community doing a diversity of things will mean that we can withstand more ups and downs in the economy. We're not going to be reliant on just one industry or one major employer. And I think that's critical in these rural communities because we need that diversity to be stronger.
Being able to go into an intensive program and learn from mentors that have been there, done that. They ask you the right questions. They kind of help you hone in on what the next product might be or the next model might be is huge to the ecosystem here. You know, as a CEO, I always have a product in mind. And so having someone bounce those ideas with me and help me hone in on what the next product should be and the next investment should be was really where I needed that help.
We're bringing people with ideas together. We're helping them get those ideas off the ground and then translating that into new businesses in our community.
Hi, I'm Juliana Dodson, and I am the Deputy Executive Director of the Hannah Grimes Center for Entrepreneurship, which is in Southwest New Hampshire in Keene. And I'm also the Radically Rural Director, which is our national programming. And through Radically Rural, we have a national summit every year, which is taking place this year, September 25th and 26th, right here in Keene. And we also have virtual roundtables during the year. We make small town visits. I just got back from Hood River, Oregon last week. And we wrote our first white paper last year to help advocate for issues that are important to our rural communities. So we do many different things with Radically Rural, but I would say for me, nurturing thriving communities is multifaceted. It comes down to a personal level and an institutional level. I think it's easy to talk about nurturing and weaving, social weaving work and things like that from behind a computer screen or in theory, but then actually doing the work is perhaps the most important thing that we can do. So knocking on your neighbor's door or actually showing up to important community events and giving your time and all of that. So I do it on a personal level for sure. Right now, for example, I'm working on a brownfields remediation project in our small town. I've been working on it as a volunteer for about 4 years, and I've probably got at least another 5 to go. And I think also the thread that carries me through with what it means to nurture communities is care of earth and people. And so that really flows through everything I do, whether it's personal or institutional. As an institution, the Hannah Grimes Center, we nurture our community one problem at a time, addressing problems one at a time, helping entrepreneurs and nonprofits one at a time, and just making connections one at a time. And we have been doing that for 27 years. And in 2018, as also Rural Assembly does and Rural Strategies, we realized that the importance of convening and shaping and sharing ideas together and how important that is to rural communities to kind of create our own density. And so we started doing that through our annual summit and the programming that I mentioned. And this year, one of the important things that we're going to talk about is social weaving and how to do that in an authentic way and in a way that will benefit our personal and local, regional, and national communities. So I'd love to see you there September 25th and 26th. We have sliding sale ticket prices, so you can pick a free ticket or anything up to full price. So thank you for this opportunity to share what it means to nurture thriving communities, and thank you to Rural Assembly everywhere.
When I think about what we need right now, the answer I keep landing on is places where we can connect, where we're pushed to think about solutions, and where we can get ideas for what's next. I hope that that's what this year's Rural Assembly Everywhere has brought to you. Thank you to all of the speakers, artists, and all of you who are working hard to tend to your communities. Please fill out our survey and let us know what you thought and what you'd like to see more of. Now for our raffle. I've randomly selected 3 folks who are still active with us today here on Crowdcast. And what you'll do is when I announce your name, you'll just send an email to the email address in the chat. So first up, the winner of a very nice Rural Assembly t-shirt will be Celeste Arnold. So Celeste, send us an email. And now for stickers. We have this lovely Rural Assembly Everywhere sticker. The winners of this sticker, well, these stickers are Laura Bucksbaum and Mark Wilkins. So please send us an email and we'll pop these in the mail so that you can share the Rural Assembly spirit everywhere you go. Thank you all for joining in, for participating in the chat, and for doing the work that you do for your rural neighbors and places every single day. We'll see you at our sessions next week. There is still time to register, and let's please stay connected. Thank you.